if you have not already met her, introduce you to Tammy Tolman. And Tammy, take it away.
Thank you. So we're going to try to do a workshop today online, which is always challenging. But, again, it's one of those things we've got to keep working through, because the only way we're going to stay connected is to try to use all the means that we can when we can't actually meet face to face. So in my studies at the moment, I get the privilege of speaking to a lot of different people and interviewing them and hearing kind of what are their challenges and what are the things that maybe are the barriers to what's happening and how we share the story. And when I mean share the story, it's like, how do we open up God's word, God's promises in a way that everyone can do it? And one of the things that we find, the feedback I get is that, it's okay to play together, it's okay to kind of serve together, it's okay to be social together. But when it comes to learning, like deep learning, that's when we need to all segregate and do our things separately. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a space for that, but I actually do want to I want to push into, can we learn something really deep and meaty together? And it's interesting that I use the words meat, because what I do hear people say to me is, when we're together, I just don't get anything out of it. And the very common saying I hear from people is that there's just not enough meat for me. When the kids are there, everything's dumbed down, or when the youth are there, everything's dumbed down. And, I turn off during the kids' talk and there's just not enough meat for me. Well, I suppose that's the piece that I want to push into that a little bit, because I'm not convinced that that's the barrier that goes and stops there, and then we can't have a conversation from then on. So, in our emptiness and openness to things, can we explore that together? So I want to say, okay, let's have a look. We're in a kitchen. I have a great big piece of meat. Okay, a ridiculous size meat, like seriously. There's some people that would be salivating about that, and there's others that go, oh my gosh, that's just ridiculous. But when I hear people, older people, mainly, I don't mean to put you in that category, but it is, they say, I just need meat. And when I come to church and when I want to hear about God's story, I need to delve into the meat of it all. And when other ages are present, that's not always possible. So I suppose I want to say, when I think of, and I'm not a nutritionist by any means, even though I look like I'm in a kitchen and I'm looking very like I'm cooking things, but when I look up Google and I see how long it takes to digest meat in our bodies, it says anywhere between hours to 2 days that it can take for a piece of meat to be digested. And if you were only to eat meat, imagine how long that would take. Now, I know when I have a good steak on the barbie, which I absolutely love, that I do feel pretty full at the end. And the stats show that if you eat a lot of meat, you can actually feel very, very bloated, and because it takes a long time for your body to digest. And that's kind of thing. So the bloating, it's kind of like that full feeling. Now, we all like to feel full, clearly. But is it saying that that's really all we should be eating? Now, I'm not advocating for veganism here. I like my meat. I'm not saying I should be vegetarian. I'm saying all those things are valuable, but I'm saying that there is an absolute truth that takes a long time to digest something like this. So I suppose I'm saying what I'd really love us to talk about today is a balance. I just happen to have something prepared for you, like a true kitchen show, of what we might consider a balanced diet. Now, I don't know, we're not all going to agree on this. We're not all going to find that this is, that we totally agree. But there's a lot of proof to say that a balanced diet is not just all meat, but that we need the breads, the grains, the fruits, the eggs, even a bit of chocolate. We need it all as a balance. And I suppose that's what I want to talk about today, is what does it mean for us to look at things more like a balance? Because the other piece of that is that if I say that, no, actually, when I come to church, I just want all meat. I just want you to just tell me. And usually the way that we do that is that someone stands up the front and talks for 30 minutes. And it's kind of like, if I can do it, it's kind of like someone's shoving meat down my gullet for 30 minutes without stopping and I'm going to have any time to chew. Can you visualize this? That you've not got any time to chew, that you've just got this this meat coming down and down and down. And that's actually, some people actually say that that's actually what they believe is the best way for us to share the story. I don't know about you, but that visual enough for me goes, I'm not really sure if we've kind of, I suppose what I want to say is we've made a lot of assumptions. We've assumed that it's best to, that this is the best way for it to happen, for us to learn and digest. We've assumed that it's all about what I need to digest and no one else. We've made some assumptions that veggies and salad and bread and goods and sugar actually doesn't really have much to offer me. And in short, in some ways, it means that assumes that in a short sitting, I can actually consume all of this without chewing and without stopping and without actually allowing it to digest. I'm oversimplifying this process, but I still believe it's a great visual to go, if that's our barrier, then I actually believe we need to unpack that a little bit and go, we really understand a balanced meal, whatever that balance looks like for you, is so much more important. But what does it look like for us to share the story? Again, John, all I can see is you. To share the story across a balanced diet, not just deep meat. And more than that, to reframe our thinking to say that to eat this is not actually a deep learning experience. And that's what I would love us to talk about today. I've got a bit of a formula I want to put out towards you, to you. And it's not just a meat diet. It's saying that with some variety, with some balance, with some time, with some chewing, with some community and togetherness, I actually believe we can have a deeper digestional learning experience. Now, yes, I've just made a word up. Digestional. It's not a real word, but I'm into making new words up. I want to actually say we can have that experience that is all together and is deep. It's not just dumbing down, and that all ages can enter into it in different ways. And I'm not just talking theory here, because I have the privilege of being a part of an intergenerational community, and we do this every week together. So I suppose what I want to say is that hold this visual, and next time you hear someone say, oh yeah, I just need more meat, maybe we need to be able to talk into that and see that there are other ways of doing things. Well, what could that look like? Well, I'm glad you asked. Now, of course, in the workshop, if you're all here, we would actually do this together. And this is the hard piece about online. But just so happens that I'm in lockdown, and so our faith community isn't meeting either. And so last week and the week before, we've been meeting online, and we've been still eating meat, what I believe is a digestional deep experience together across the ages. So I thought, well, I can actually we can do a little bit of that together and see where we get to as a little example of how this can be done. So this is where you need, what I asked from you is, I'll put that there, but this is where you'll need your magazines, any kind of magazine. And this is where some paper or some pen might be great. I know when we had everyone together, some were doodling, some were writing, some were doing different things. Everyone had magazines in front of them. And I also had given them something like this that you've actually got as a resource that you can get. And then that was how we started this conversation. So I can't do it all because we don't have enough time, but we're going to try to do a little bit together, and let's see where we go. Let's see what we can find. Let's see how we can discover some deeper digestional learning experience together. So first, I'm going to get you to start by firstly opening up your Facebook to Intergenerate Australia would be ideal. And there's going to be a clip there, or a little post that's going to come up in a minute. And you're going to post from there. So I'm going to be asking the question, when you think of the word intimacy, what comes to mind? Now, you might have some things that straight away come into your mind, But I'm going to ask us to, again, be open and empty ourselves and think, maybe not go straight to what's natural. And actually, whatever book you've chosen, I've got a recipe book and a National Geographic. I mean, you might have anything. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's got pictures. That's why I asked for magazines. And I'm going to ask you to just to flick. I'm going to give you some time to flick, and I'm going to get you to, and so as you flick through, something may just capture your eye, and I want you to stay at that and look at it and maybe think, what is it about intimacy that's jumping out at you when you see that picture? Now, if you can take a picture of that, kind of with your camera, and then post it onto the Facebook question, which should be coming up pretty soon. I'm just going to have a look and see if I've got it myself, so I can maybe show you. Yes, it kind of looks like that. So it says, part of the online workshop, add your image as a comment below. I'm not sure if they can pan right into there. I want you to see if in the comments you could put your picture. So that's one way to engage. And obviously just doing it yourself is a great way to engage. The second way to engage is that even if you just stare at that picture, what words come up to you, or what thoughts or what feelings come up for you, put them in the chat, in our chat. And let's kind of build a collective of some words and some images when we think of the simple word, yet not simple, of intimacy. What does intimacy mean for you, and what can we kind of look at and see it in some of these pictures? So I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes just to do that, and to share on your Facebook with pictures, and to share in the chat with words, and let's see what we collectively can do as we share what God's challenging us about, the word intimacy. I've just been watching as things have gone up on Facebook, and then there's also, our chat, our Zoom chat, that words have been coming up. And this is where it's hard when we're in a big group like this. But if I had time, and if time wasn't an issue, which is, remember, it's one of the pieces in the formula, time is a key thing. I would love us to be able to just kind of share why we chose that particular picture. And this is what I did with our community. We got into smaller groups, and we actually shared, and then we got into the large groups, and we shared why we chose that picture, and the richness that came out of that sharing of what intimacy meant and what that picture meant of words. And even as I read through some of the words that you guys have already written here, you've got layers. I'm looking at connection, intentional, inclusiveness, a private space to share, trust, things where you can be open in your discussion. This is all your shared information, vulnerability, living through difficult times together, connection, joy, these words, honesty, authenticity, inclusion, acceptance. It's all these things. It's this beautiful mix of things, which is not just maybe what the first thing you thought about when you thought about intimacy, but it's just so rich with so many beautiful things. And there's some beautiful pictures here that I would love to know. Tim Pellas has put this great picture, and this is where the art of sharing and not me just talking is so rich, because I want him to say why it is that he chose that. I don't know, Tim, can you unmute and tell us why you chose that gorgeous picture?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. Partly it's because the only available space at the moment is in my daughter's room, so I'm looking through her magazines. But I really like the beaver. Apparently beavers smell like cookies, is the fun fact from the National Geographic magazine. So that's kind of fun. But I just thought the hospitality that's invoked in that image, a number of other people had said things about sharing meals, I think that's really important. I know Tammy's church does that a lot. My church do that a lot. Just that coming together over meals really slows down the time. You're forced to go deeper with people, and so that's really nice. So whether that's done in the home or in a big group at church, or one-on-one in a cafe, that just the hospitality that's invoked there, I thought was really important.
As you can see, just by flicking through magazines and by bringing up pictures, you open up a huge conversation that all ages can engage in. And when we did this with our all ages, there was this, there was laughter, there was joy, there was this stretching, there was different perspectives, and it just made that experience much richer than for me to do what you would normally do if you were just kind of me speaking and go, okay, here's a slide. Intimacy is, this. And while that's okay to do that, if we want to share the story, sharing each other's perspective of intimacy is so beautiful, and it's so rich, and we need to not underestimate what can be done there. I want to take all those pictures. I'm going to collage them and send them back to you guys as a collage, because again, it's just those beautiful representations that is not, that we often think, well, that's not meat. That's kind of, I don't know what part of fruit or food that you want to call it, but it is actually deeper meat than we think if we're allowed to allow that to penetrate into our hearts. When I think of intimacy and when I think of what it means to be truly known by another person and to actually feel that from someone else, I think that in this COVID period, not only is that so important, but for me, the idea that there is someone that I can never be isolated from, never be separated from, who is always with me and actually knows me intimately, is God. And when I look at the scriptures, Psalms is one of the first places I tend to think about when I think about sharing intimacy, because so many of the Psalms writers actually were able to just write down those kind of intimate feelings, the intimacy that happens not only with what we talked about, trust and closeness, but you can't actually bare your soul as easily if you got to have that trust. You got to have that intimacy when you can say it, like in the Psalms, and David often says, what's going on? And I don't know how to do this. And where are you, God? To me, there's an intimacy that he has with his Father that allows him to not only share the close bits, but also the hard bits, and can be completely vulnerable and completely honest with that. And I love that about the Psalms. And so we're going to delve a little bit in the Psalms together and see again the ways in which that deep richness we can learn. But let's first look at a video that actually brings it up and shares some deep what was my word? Digestional learning through this video, which is a great starting point for us to jump into Psalms. Let's look at this together.
We've been talking about poetry in the Bible, how biblical poets love design and masterfully use metaphor and symbolism. These poems invite us into an experience, to ponder ideas slowly and from many angles.
And the largest collection of poetry in the Bible is the book of Psalms. So that's what we're going to look at here.
Now, the Israelites composed lots of poetry throughout their history.
Yeah, poems were written by Israelite sages, kings, and prophets. Some poems were sung by choirs in the Jerusalem temple, while others were prayed by families at home. And over the centuries, the most important and widely read poems were compiled together to be read or sung on special occasions.
And I'm familiar with books of poetry, a large collection of the greatest poems in one place, and I can read through and pick my favorites.
But the Book of Psalms isn't that kind of collection. Here, each poem has been expertly crafted and then placed where it is for a reason, to create a storyline from the book's beginning to its end. The Psalms poetically retell the entire biblical story, and they invite you into a literary temple.
A literary temple?
Yeah, so the tabernacle, and then later the temple in Jerusalem, were where ancient Israelites went to meet with God. When you arrived, you would see art and imagery everywhere. You'd see priests performing rituals, you'd hear songs and prayers, all of it symbolically proclaiming that your God rules the world from this mountain and you're in his living room.
So the temple was a place to be in God's presence and also to immerse yourself in the story of God's kingdom.
Exactly. And so try to imagine how traumatic it was when the Babylonians invaded Jerusalem, plundered and burned the temple, and then took many Israelites into exile.
Yeah, where can they go now to meet with God, to sing their story and say their prayers?
That's where the book of Psalms comes in. It's a prayer book for exiles, designed as a virtual temple. You enter the Psalms to meet with God and to hear the entire biblical story of God's kingdom sung back to you in poetry.
Cool, but how does the Psalms do it?
Let's start with the book's design. There are 150 poems broken up into 5 clear sections. At the beginning, there's been placed a short introduction, Psalms 1 and 2, which lay out the main themes of the whole book by reviewing the biblical storyline.
Okay.
Psalm 1 looks back to the Garden of Eden and its river of life.
Yeah, God placed humanity in a garden temple. And here, humans decide to define good and evil on their own terms, and so are exiled from the garden.
But the first psalm paints a portrait of hope, about an upright human who delights in God's wisdom, which is called Torah, or instruction. This person is like the tree of life in the garden temple. They eternally blossom because they're planted in the river of God's life.
Yeah, that's beautiful, but who's it supposed to be?
Well, remember that story in Genesis? After humanity's foolish rebellion, God made a promise.
Oh, right, a future human, the seed of the woman who would come and defeat evil and restore the world.
And that's what Psalm 2 is about. God's promise that a king would come from the line of David. He's called the Son of God and the Messiah. God appoints him to bring justice on human evil and to restore God's kingdom and peace over the nations.
So Psalms 1 and 2 introduce all these main themes.
Yes, and then the book develops those themes through the 5 sections. The first 2 explore the complicated story of David and his royal family. The third section focuses on the tragedy of Israel's exile and the downfall of David's royal line. But then the 4th and 5th sections rekindle the hope for the Messiah, a new temple, and God's kingdom on the other side of the exile. Then the book ends with a 5-part conclusion, praising God for his faithfulness.
Cool. Now, nearly half of the Psalms are connected to one guy, King David, who God chose to rule Israel.
Yes, David's story is really important in this book. He experienced many times of hardship, but he trusted God with radical faith. And in these poems, David shares his fears, confesses his failures, and offers thanks to his Redeemer. And he's constantly speaking of a deep longing to be in God's presence in the temple.
But wait, David lived before the temple was even built.
Exactly. This portrait of David, hoping and praying for God's kingdom and a future temple, it resembles the hopes of the later generations of the exiles. And so, David's prayers could become theirs as well.
David's like a prayer coach, giving us words for how to pray and how to discover God's presence in good times and bad.
Exactly. There are 73 poems connected to David, but most of the rest come from later generations of biblical poets, and they have learned to pray and hope like David. And so the end result is the Book of Psalms, designed as a virtual temple for all generations of God's people.
This isn't a kind of book you just read once and put down.
No, it's designed for a lifetime of slow rereading and reflection. These prayers and laments and songs of praise are meant to become our own. They're poems for exiles who are learning to live by God's wisdom and to seek God's justice in the world as they hope for the coming Messiah and the kingdom of God.
That might have been a bite-sized, pardon the pun, but I'm being deliberate, that might have been a bite-sized piece of information that you can grab off 5 minutes. But actually, there was so much depth in that. There were just big statements. And actually what happened was a conversation expounded far more than I expected within our community, from 70-year-olds right down to some of our youngest, about what things that they saw in that space that really had either they'd never heard before, or they hadn't heard in that way before, or that it actually just kind of enriched what it was that meant more for them for the Psalms. And so again, if we had time together, I would say, let's break into groups and let's talk about what did we hear there? What were some of the big statements? And again, you can throw it in the Zoom chat if you want to. What were the big statements? For me, one of the most powerful ones was this sense of this virtual temple, that we can enter into this virtual temple, which today is don't we need that? We're feeling isolated, and the thought that I can come into this virtual temple and meet God here, and that David is like my prayer coach who helps me to kind of say and hear things, and for me to be able to not only open it up and go, oh my gosh, it's like someone's just read my mind and said exactly how I feel. And these Psalms were written thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago. So for me, these are the things we can actually grab bite sizes, and we can sit there, but we need to stop. We need to chew on it. We need to share it, and actually in community have those kind of experiences together and stop and chew, rather than just all this incredible information that can come to us, that we download, and we somehow think that that's actually the best way for us to learn. We know that meat needs to be chewed, and we know that different ways in which we can have a balance. And so the Psalms are rich for that intimacy, and for that sense that we can meet him, and for that sense that that for those who were in exile, it was a place where they could find God's wisdom. We're not in exile, but some of us might feel it right now. We're all separate in little boxes, and I can see some of your faces, but I'm struggling so much that I can't actually interact with you. And so that sense that it doesn't mean that while intimacy is a struggle, it means that there is a place we can go together, and even individually, and find that sense of intimacy. And I love that reminder in the Psalms, and that it's for everyone.
Tammy, there are a couple of great messages in the chat. Where Karen is just talking about how this temple, this virtual temple, is a place that actually engages all of the senses. And Taryn just made a point of that great imagery of where the lady was reading the Bible and the colour came out of the Bible, and just makes the point that the light and colour, as she reads, it brings light and colour into the world that she's in. Just some really great images there. And that there's this connection between pre-temple times and exile times, and that the prayers cross over. They're continuing. Yeah.
Now, speaking of senses, great segue. I want to do something a little risky. It may not work, but hey, you can only try these things because we're in a glass house and it doesn't really matter. We're going to give some try. We're going to try to engage the senses a little bit. So what that means is that I want to read through a psalm. I'm going to read through Psalm 46. And you will be familiar with some of these things, some of these statements. But I'm wanting us to, firstly, I'm going to read it through slowly. And again, in your own kind of reflecting or writing or anywhere, and even if you kind of if you wanted to download this, or if you had it, it's fine. It's still there for you to use. I'm giving it to you as a resource. I'm asking you to consider the sounds. I'm asking you to consider the images, and I'm asking you to consider the emotions that you feel when and as I read this psalm to you. Again, put it in the chat, write it down. It's really all that matters is, again, that you kind of go there for yourself. But I just want to read some verses out of Psalm 46, and I want you to think about the feelings, the sounds, and the images that you get when you hear this. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging, there is a river whose streams made glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, and she will not fall. God will help her at the break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice and the earth melts. The Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and he shatters the spear and he burns the shields with fire. And there were so many emotions and so many images and so many things that are going on just in those first 9 verses. I don't know what came up for you. I don't know how those kind of reactions and what grabbed you. Again, a great time to stop and chew, to stop and share as a community, to stop and say, oh, what about this? And when did I hear that? And I would love for us to have that space to do that. But I'm really just outlaying these processes to say to you, actually, we can read scripture, we can go deep, we can do this together and we can learn from each other. And I don't think that we do really appreciate it enough. And so what I did with this verse and with these verses was that I read them again and I asked people to make noises. This is where you need your your rambunctious. I've got the wrong word. I'm trying to think of the word, but those wild and crazy people in your community, the young ones, the ones that don't have a problem with making noises. In fact, I think one of our 7-year-olds made the best noises, if I recall greatly, and get them to make those noises. That's the word I'm looking for, rambunctious. Thank you. Get them to make those noises while you read it through. Create a whole sensual, visual experience where we do it. And I don't know, I'm going to ask you to be bold. Put your mics on. I don't care. It's a noisy passage, all right? But all I'm going to ask you to do is when you see my hand go like that you have to cease all the noises. So that's the one thing you need to be looking at. Otherwise, I don't care. Go wild. All right. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength in an ever-pressing present help in trouble. Help! Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way.
Holy crap.
And the mountains fall into the sea. Though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging.
Quiver. Oh, look here. Run, Forrest.
There's a river whose streams made glad the city of God.
Yay!
The whole place where the Most High dwells, God is within her and she will not fall.
Yeah!
God will help her at the break of day.
Check out that sunrise.
Nations are in uproar.
Hey!
Kingdoms are falling.
Bang!
And he lifts his voice and the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress.
Yeah!
Come and see what the Lord has done. The desolations he's brought on the earth.
Check it out.
He makes war cease.
War is over.
The earth. He breaks the bow. And he shatters the spear. And he burns the shields with fire.
Ouch!
But be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. The Psalms speak to us about an intimacy that amidst the noise and the crowd and the crashes and the difficulty and the disappointments and the pain and the hurt and all the things that are happening in our world right now, we can know that if we are still and know that He is God, that somehow in that intimate space, there's a sense of being able to be calm and trust. And I'm not just talking words here, because all of us know what it feels like to be out of control and for things to be crashing in on us in different ways. And the place that we can enter into, that virtual temple, and actually just breathe and be still and trust that He is still our God. That's the power of the Psalms. That's the power of intimacy. And it's an individual thing, and yet it's so beautiful that when we can be face to face, share that together. And from there, for us, we entered into that real kind of, there was, even one of the ladies said, I don't want to move from here, she said, even when we were online together 2 weeks ago. There's such richness and reminder. There's this, it's that stopping and chewing and pausing. And I don't care how old you are, and I don't care how young you are. We all need to learn to know how to enter into that space. The Psalms is a beautiful place to do that. And there are not only that kind of majesty and awe and reminder that God is God even though nothing makes sense, but there's also these beautiful Psalms that kind of share that lament, that pain, that place that we kind of all feeling in different ways, and whether it's COVID or otherwise, and mostly there'll be lots of other things that are going on for our lives. That pattern that David gives us about lamenting and saying, you know, oh my gosh, God, where are you? However, I will praise you, is a really beautiful pattern that we all need to be able to know and understand that rhythm and have that intimacy. There are incredibly beautiful Psalms. Psalms like this one, where it says in Psalm 13, how long will you forget me, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you refuse to accept me? How long must I wonder if you've forgotten me? How long must I feel this sad in my heart? How long will my enemy win against me? You know, there's some real honest intimacy there where David's crying out saying, like, seriously, where are you, God? And I love that. I love the honesty of that. Because, you know, some of us think, oh, we've got to make sure that we all sound like, oh, yes, praise God. Well, actually, no, we can be intimate enough with God to say, I don't understand. There is that psalm in Psalm 42 about the song that we often know as deer pants in the streams of water, so my soul pants for you. That there's this kind of these beautiful imageries, as we talked about, that engages the senses of words that have been put to song that we can sing. There's Psalm 6 that says, Lord, I'm so weak. I cry out to you all night. My pillow is soaked. My bed is dripping wet from tears. My enemies have caused me such sorrow that my eyes are worn out from crying. I mean, there's some real honesty there of what David's going through or what some of the other Psalms go. And we need to stop and chew on them. We need to allow each other to say, this is how we feel, and be able to comfort each other and to be able to share our stories and be able to pray for each other and to love each other. And for me, these are the things that we underestimate what we can do across the ages, through visuals, through stopping, through sharing, through silly sounds, through reading, through listening to things. Those kind of, the variety that we bring within community, within stopping, within chewing, and within actually sharing together are actually a really great formula for sharing the story that is so much richer than I think sometimes we allow when one person. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't people that have some beautiful things to share, and that's there's an element of download in that space. But I do believe, I don't know if it's just me, but I do believe sometimes you hear something and then you kind of want to go, wait, can we just unpack that for a minute? And what spaces do we allow that to happen? And when as we unpack it, seeing that inclusion and accepting and hearing other people's stories or parts of the story or versions of the story or impact of the story is actually what makes the experience so much richer. And so for me, that's the environments, the spaces we want to create so that we can learn together. And even the sense that we think, well, we might have a bit more meat, we might have had a bit more experience, but then to not enjoy the beauty kind of, the little bit of chocolate or sugar that you might get from someone who's new or young or still trying to work it out. And even not understanding that there's still something valid in that and something important in that. To me, it's those kind of things that I want us to be open to. And actually, when you do and when you are open, you can enter into and hear things that maybe you didn't. When I hear people say, no, I turn off when the kids' talk's on, I just think, wow, you've really missed something really quite profound. And the profoundness of what a child can say or what someone can say in a different form is it's really sad when we actually turn that off. So what does the Bible say? Just to let you know, from there I encourage everyone to write their own psalm and to also break into groups and break down and talk about different psalms. And then throughout the week, we were sharing with each other via Messenger and encouraging each other the things that we were sharing, pictures, some of the psalms that we had. To me, and it actually went on into the next week, where last week we did some more on the psalms, and everyone brought their own special psalm or anything that had affected them, and we broke into groups and shared our psalms and shared the psalms that we'd written. And it's just kind of been morphing from there, because we're just creating a space where people can bring their piece to the story and then learn from each other. There are quite a number of verses that can, in the Bible, really back up, in a sense, the importance of being together and sharing together. There is Hebrews, which says, don't neglect meeting together and encourage one another. There is 1 Peter that says, have a unity of mind and have sympathy and brotherly love and a tender heart and a humble mind. Now, I don't mean could cause some problems here, but a humble mind doesn't say, oh, well, I need meat. Humble mind says, what can I learn as I bring my openness in that space? Hebrews 10 says, let us consider how we stir up one another for love and good works, not neglecting to meet together and encourage one another. There's just all these beautiful, beautiful statements where Matthew says where 2 or more are gathered, and where Corinthians says when you come together, each one has something to bring. Each one for the building up of each other. For me, when we share the story together, we are richer. And when we look at some of the elements that I talked about, when we talk about time, when we talk about chewing, when we talk about being together in community, when we talk about what are the other ones? Variety, and when we talk about a balanced meal. To me, we have a far deeper ability to have what I call a digestional learning experience. I want the whole lot. And I don't know about you, I just want to encourage you that the more and more that we are willing to see what is possible across a balanced diet with those key words, variety, time, chewing, then I think that is actually the beginning of us being able to really begin to learn together and stop the barriers and the things that are going to stop us, but actually open it up and go, all right, what can we learn together and how can I bring my piece to that table? For me, that's the piece that I want to leave you with, is just that reminder of those key things. And when I'm piecing something together across the ages to share a story, I don't come with the assumption that what I have to bring is all that everyone needs to hear. And here's the meat, and you just digest this as I throw it down your throat. I want to come with that humble mind that says, I can bring my piece and I can bring some pieces and we can start with them and then we can actually see where we go there together. Now that's a bit scary because you don't know where it's going to go. But actually, quite frankly, it's really exciting because it's not all up to me. It's actually me bringing my piece and then I see where it goes. And quite frankly, I have got the privilege of doing ministry and life with these incredible women and men of God and children and young people that I just am so blessed to be able to hear from them and be enriched by them. And to me, that's actually what it means to share the story together.